I started a series on the book of Genesis, and I'm on the third part, and the title of my message today is Creation's Bang. I'm going to reread as I have for the first 2 weeks, and this is the third week. I'm going to reread the first five verses, of Genesis chapter 1. If you're not sure where that is in the Bible, it's on the first page. So just open it up to the first page. After the table of contents, there it is. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. I'm going to, even as I do this large series on Genesis, I'm going to sort of do a mini-series within this series, and it'll be a 3-part series, which will be, this being the first one, Creation's Bang, is really about the origin of the universe. The second part is the origin of life, and the third part is the origin of man. And so if you're interested in this stuff, or you've had biology class, or you're trying to understand where God fits into all that, that's what I'm going to be focused on for the next 3 weeks of preaching. Some of the bulk of Genesis 1, I'm going to spend talking about next week, because most of Genesis 1 that discusses the creation of the earth and the details are coming up for next week. I want to mainly focus on the origin of the universe. And I want to briefly talk about this concept in verse 5, where it speaks about God saw the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening and there was morning, the first day. And this idea about what Christian views are about this meaning of the word day. And the simplest understanding of the meaning of the word day is that the word day means 24 hours, the day that we have today. And there are many Christians, and many Christians that I know, who believe that the 6 days spoken about in Genesis 1 are 6 24-hour periods. Those people are my brother and sisters in Christ. They are people that have influenced my life for God, and I have all the respect for those people. Some of them have done things like build the Museum of the Bible and the Noah's Ark in America, and there's the Institute for Creation Research that holds that view. And I accept them as, and would always accept them as biblical Christians, and, could teach in the Sunday school or preach up here, and maybe people who have preached up here believe that view. When you look at the early church and the church fathers, they asked this question. Now, they asked this question before they had science or understanding of astronomy breathing down their neck. So they asked this after the time of Jesus, 100, 200, 500 years after Jesus. They were asking, is this a literal 24-hour period, or is it not? And a lot of the great church fathers said, no, this is not a 24-hour period. This is an idea of an era or a period of time. Of course, people are familiar with the passage in, I think it's 2 Peter 3:9. A day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. On top of that, when you're speaking about the first day here, you don't even have the sun and the moon yet to really speak about a 24-hour period. So for what it matters and for what I'm going to be teaching today, I do not believe it is a literal 6 days. Now, I think it really is important to go slow on this point for a second. Because if somebody asks me, do you believe in the literal interpretation of the Bible? And if I say no, which I would, and people gasp that there's a pastor here that says no, it's like taking a sound bite, and this political people do this where they don't allow the person to explain what they mean. I don't believe in a literal interpretation of every verse in the Bible because some verses were not meant to be taken literally. Example, in the Psalms, it speaks about that the hands of the trees will clap their hands. You can read it in the Psalms, okay? The hands of the trees will clap their hands. Now, you could say, well, that's talking about the branches swaying in the wind, and it looks like clapping of the hands. Absolutely. But if you believe in a literal interpretation of every verse in the Bible, that means in David's day, the trees had hands, okay? And now we're getting into sort of Veggie Tales type things when your kids watch these shows and they're all clapping, and then you're like, Bob the Tomato doesn't even have hands. Okay, how are they clapping? We need to understand that sometimes people speak in a way that isn't meant to be literal. I'll get into this later with the age of the universe the way that some people speak about the universe as being, 6, 8, 10, 20,000 years old. It is an absolutely acceptable biblical position to believe that. How they came to that was adding up the ages of all the people in the Bible and stacking them on top of each other. The problem with that is the same problem with the word day is the problem with the word son. That when somebody is the son or the father of somebody, it doesn't always mean that next generation. So what I'm saying is that if you have 3 people and you have this person is the son of this person is the son of this person, and you add them up, you get a number. But in the scripture, it makes no attempt to mention every person. You say, I don't believe that. It's okay. You can believe that this is, just add them all up and that's the age. However, it also says in the book of Matthew that Jesus is the son of David. And so, therefore, you will have to believe that somehow David is the father of Jesus, if you just want to believe everything literally. So do I believe the Bible is true? Absolutely. Every word of it? Absolutely. Is every word of it to be taken literally? Absolutely not. You'll go crazy reading Revelation if you try to take every verse in Revelation to be something which is literal. However, all the respect to the people who want to believe and feel that the best understanding of God is that those are a literal 6 days. I'm not going to say any more about that. I want to get into the origin of the universe. When we speak about the origin of the universe, we're going to see next week that there's a lot of details of each day of creation. And I will be speaking more next week about what each of these days, sometimes an interpretation of different Christian theories, of the day gap theory, that there was a big lag of time between day 3 and 4, and some other types of views of it. But for now, I would literally just, did I say literal right there? I did. That's funny. I used to like that guy with the curly hair that painted on PBS there, Bob Ross. Yeah. So he's got the canvas out, and he just, and I have no artistic ability, and I would watch him sometimes because of the way he spoke, and just, I got this thing here, and he flips on the light, there's the blank canvas, and he's got the thing, and he starts tapping into the pastels and the brushes, and I'm going to put some things here, and I'm going to do this over here. Notice how this I can use this piece of the brush, or mix these two colors, or don't be too concerned about this. This is Genesis chapter 1 for me. Okay. This is what the Lord is doing. The Lord is just like, okay, first of all, let me turn on the light. Let there be light. Okay, I'm going to show you this canvas right here. Genesis 1. God created the heavens and the earth. There it is. Okay, let me just, okay, now we're going to do a little bit here. We're going to, show you a little bit of the earth. And, let me put in the moon and the sun here. Let me do that. Okay, I want you to understand how I understand Genesis chapter 1. That each day of Genesis chapter 1 is God giving more details of what he created. Period. It's more details. It's like, when, I'm old enough to remember this, when they went from black and white to color TVs. Okay? That was a big deal. You had black and white, and then all of a sudden one day, oh my goodness, and The Wizard of Oz, when that was in color, oh, that was crazy. It just seemed unbelievable. And so the unfolding of what we'll do more next week with Genesis 1 is just an understanding of that God made everything in the universe, okay? And you have to understand that when we talk about the origin of the universe, and when the scripture reveals in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth, and he speaks about later the stars and all the created things, that society and people in that day believed that the stars were gods. They believed that the stars were in and of themselves some type of deity, and that you see all sorts of views of this. And so here you have a real powerful view of really what the nature of the universe is and who God is. So when we get to the next week, and we'll see God creates the heavens and the earth, that's overarching. He says that at the end, and it says it in chapter 2 before the creation of man. It's like he's circling back. He goes through all the creation and creates man day 6, day 7 he rests. You go to chapter 2, there's the creation of man again. So you go day 1, he made the light. Day 2, he makes, the atmosphere. Day 3, he makes earth with plants on it. Day 4, the star and the sun. Wait a minute, how could the sun not be there with the plants there? It's simple. He's circling back. He's giving more detail. These are all the things he did. And oh, did I tell you about this? So what are the key teachings of Genesis chapter 1? I have 3 points today. The 3 points are: the universe has an absolute beginning, the universe is made by God, and the universe is fine-tuned to exist and to exist for life. So before I get to those 3 points, I'd like everybody before next week to try to read chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis. Just take your time and go home and read these chapters, because there's just a lot of stuff that just doesn't feel like it would take a day. You see, sort of Adam, naming all the animals and doing everything like that. I don't know if you've ever had a kid, but, it took my wife and I about 2 months to come up with the name for Justice, and things take time. And I just don't think that just being super fixated on the 24-hour period will lend itself to how earth-shattering the understanding of who God is and what he did and how much this was a revelation, Genesis 1. So, first part. The universe has an absolute beginning. Now, at this point in time, what Genesis 1 teaches, that there's an absolute beginning to the universe, is something which has been established by astronomy and by scientists. Now, I'm old enough to remember this as well, that for a long period of time, the prevailing view of science was that the universe always existed. And so people who renounced Genesis 1, who didn't believe in God, believed that the universe has always been here. And it was called the steady state theory. And it was perfect. If you believe the universe is always here, you have no beginning, you have no need for God. You don't have to answer how or why it's always been here, but there it is. Then what happened is, in the 1950s and 60s, starting even before that, in the 40s, there's a man by the name of George Lemaitre. He's a cosmetologist from Belgium. Actually, he started this work in the 20s. And he showed and proposed that the universe had a beginning. He was mocked. He was attacked. Because there was another feature about this cosmetologist that made people just reject him out of hand as not being somebody who would be trusted. And that feature was that he was also a Catholic priest. He was a believer in Christ. And so when he started to do research on the heavens and said, I believe that the universe had a beginning, one of the people that mocked his view decided to call it must have been a big bang when the universe began. And that title, that name, that nickname that he gave for this man's theory, which was given to mock him, he embraced and said, yeah, let's call it that. And then he had a friend named Hubble, who you may have heard of the Hubble telescope that it was named after, who was studying the stars, and they noticed that the stars are all moving away from each other, further and further away. And so if you came upon a scene, you walk around a corner and there are cars and they're all moving away from each other, you can conclude, if you go back in time, that they must have been closer together. And so what ultimately happened is that with other things, and I don't want to get into the weeds of it, but over a period of about 30 years, it was concluded that everything in the universe is spreading out and acceleratingly spreading out. And so everything at one point was just that. Virtually the entire universe was at one point. And so the reason that the scientists, and some of them were willing to speak out against it, said, I don't like this theory, is that sorry for the pun, this Big Bang theory echoes of Genesis 1. We don't want to believe it because it reminds us too much of what the Bible teaches. Nonetheless, this is established, and there really are no scientists left who believe in the steady state theory. They all believe in a beginning of the universe. However, they believe that the universe began on something that you could put on the head of a pin. And when you believe that there's an absolute beginning to the universe and it's the size of the head of a pin, They're asking you to believe something that takes a certain amount of faith, wouldn't you say? Not so much that that could have been that way, because we know God could do that with his little finger, but to believe that happened by accident, randomly. You follow me? I just don't personally have the belief and the capacity to believe that short of a miracle, everything in the entire universe, when I say universe, I'm not talking about just this solar system or the Milky Way galaxy. I mean absolutely everything. Space, time, matter, the laws of the universe, light, darkness, energy, everything from quantum physics up. All of that stuff was on the head of a pin. Okay? And there's no God involved in that. I just personally cannot accept that God is not involved in that, because we understand that when things have a beginning, this is an important point. When things have a beginning, they have a first mover. When you have a beginning, when something starts, something started that thing. That's a basic principle. The classics believe that, understanding that for things to happen, something happened. When you ask, where did this all come from, that split second before there was time, where did all this energy, where did all this thing come from, there is no answer. It used to be, well, it just expanded and contracted forever. But then they found out that can't be true for reasons I'm not going to get into. And so there's always this desire to push things back. But in this situation, no, there's an absolute beginning. And in the absolute beginning, there's a first mover, and that first mover is God. I do not want you to think that by me teaching on this, that I believe that God sort of kicked over the universe and got it going and then walked away, okay? There is a view where people will be willing to sort of genuflect to the idea that God started things, but he's been uninvolved since then. And so I don't accept that. I'm going to argue against that. But I just want to start with that the universe has a beginning, and that's something which the Bible teaches and something which is virtually universally accepted. Is everyone with me so far? This is where we are going to diverge. The second thing that Genesis 1 teaches, first thing was what? Universe has an absolute beginning. The second thing is the universe is made by God. As I said, in order for something to have a beginning, you have to have a first mover. You have to have someone or something which begins it. Now, there is a thing that Christians can understand about the nature of God, that even in his greatness and even as the heavens declare the glory of God, it is incredible how modest and humble he is, that he just doesn't have like his name on everything that he did, you know. Created by the Lord God Almighty. You ever go into like a hospital or a place and you go to sit on a bench and there's some, you know, this bench was given by so-and-so. You walk around the elevator by this, that. You know, I don't know. I've seen a lot of that. I'm not a big fan of that. For heaven's sake, when I'm gone, please don't put my name on anything here. You know, please, just that is not what I see God doing when he makes everything. He creates things. There's a beauty in everything, and he lets it speak for itself of his glory. It speaks for itself. And everything we talked about, how when there's light and he created light, that light is silent. And when plants grow silently. And so many things that are just part of the amazingness of God is done in silence. But I want to get to this spiritual point of that the universe is made by God. The point is, spiritually, that everything has a beginning, and that beginning originates with God, whether we acknowledge him or not. Whether we acknowledge him or not. My battle, the church's battle, the Bible's battle is not with science. It is not with scientists. It is with a word that you may not have heard of called scientism. That's SCIENTISM. Whenever you see a word that has ISM, ism, that's an ideology. That's a belief system. And I have an issue, and the Bible has an issue with scienceism. Scienceism says no statement is true unless it can be scientifically proven. That's the core of scienceism. I'm a man of science. I only believe that which can be scientifically proven. That's the only thing which is true. Okay, let's stop for a second. Follow me on this. Can that statement be scientifically proven? No. Okay, so this person that tells you, I only believe what science says is true. So the only thing you believe is something that can be experimentally proven is true. Yes, that statement cannot be experimentally proven to be true. Does everyone follow me on that? Let me go slow on this. Yes, one person. Okay. It's like when somebody is living in a sin, and you tell them, "Hey, the Bible says this is wrong," and then they say, "That's your truth. This is my truth," or "There are no absolutes." Have you ever heard that? There are no absolutes. There's no absolute right or wrong. No absolutes. Well, the dictum, "There are no absolutes," is an absolute. Do you understand that? You've just created an absolute by saying, "There are no absolutes." There are no absolutes except for the one that says there are none. Beyond that, then there are no other ones. To say that unless it can be proven by science, I don't believe it and it can't be true means that you can't believe that saying. You can't believe that expression. It's literally the dog is chasing its tail. What is scienceism? Scienceism is the number one place that people hide to disregard God in this day and age. And let me tell you something. Scientism, don't drop the T. There's a T in there. I always tip the hand that I was never really particularly eloquent. And yet here I am up here showing that if God can use Moses, who stuttered, he can use this person right here who was an engineer and only had a 500-word vocabulary in college. Scientism is an ironic form of superstition. All the while, the people who ascribe to it believe that they are not superstitious. It is a religion. It is a belief system. It is an ideology, all the while saying, I don't follow any ideologies. You see, you never see the Christian running away and saying, I don't follow Christ or believe in him. But the area of scientism, there we go again, the area of scientism that it particularly likes to flourish is in people who know nothing about science. The less somebody knows about science, the faster they will believe in scientism if somebody more educated tells them this is how it is. What I'm saying is that We have this unbelievable big gift from God, which is science, that we can learn, study, and discover. And that has a place. And the place for that is not speaking about the meaning of life. That when you take something and use it in the wrong spot, that's a problem. I mean, I don't know. I'm just thinking of this. If you have a toaster, it has an absolute perfect use, which is to toast bread, and you decide that you're going to throw that inbounds on a basketball game and try to dribble that and throw it in the hoop, that's not a good use for the toaster. That's not what a toaster was made for. And we could give them 1,000 other analogies of something not used. The people who are the most dogmatic about scientism have no problem, all the while saying there is no God, they have no problem crossing into areas they know nothing about and saying this is how this is. I'm going to speak about this a lot more next week, but just so I don't forget to say it, and some of you are PhD students, so no offense, but when you get a PhD in something, they get a PhD and then you read their PhD dissertation and it says something like, the preponderance of the evidence that the allele of the flagellum of a cell in the mouse embryo doesn't have isomers or something like that. You're like, what? What? You decided that you wanted to know a real lot about a real little. Some little teeny corner of the universe you're an expert in. And in aggregate, when people do that, where's my PhD people back there laughing at me now? But in aggregate, when you do that, you can advance science. That's fine. Well, when you're the expert on that, and then you cross over and you just say there's no God, if it can't be proven, then it's not true. You've stepped into another domain. That isn't the domain that you trained for. But the way in which people defer to people who have no experience in these other matters, which really begs the question of what their motive is. It just begs the question of what their motive is. And I just believe that people who are the most adamant about scientism are those people who have a serious issue with God in their personal life. Can't tell me otherwise. I've made this point before, and I don't like to speak ill of the dead. Stephen Hawking, who was an atheist, had a Christian wife, his first wife, who he left and cheated on. He had a neuromuscular disease. I'm sure that was hard to deal with. However, 99.9% of the people die within 5 years of the disease he had. He lived almost 50 years with it. But no, that wasn't enough to see that God was with him for something. Nothing was. Even as he acknowledged all the intricacies of the universe, his conclusion was, there's no God. That's fine to come to your own individual conclusion. When then you come to that conclusion and you become a group of people that then tell other people how to live, that's what I have an issue with, because scientism ultimately becomes authoritarian. That ideology, it's like communism. Okay, look, we're going to do everything together. It's like the Bible. They had everything in common. And then ultimately they start going around and stealing all your stuff and just telling you what to do. You're like, whoa, I didn't think it was like this. And that's the same with this ideology. we're going to get into this further, that they ultimately become authoritarian. And they will just make up stuff. And I'm going to talk about that more next week. And I'm thinking about the expression. I wasn't even going to do this, but I just have to go on this. Where have we heard the term follow the science? Does that expression sound familiar? Anybody that's been alive for the last 5 years? First of all, we are to follow Jesus Christ. Okay? But they don't mean follow the science. They mean follow the scientism. Follow the authoritarian. We'll just make stuff up that you have to stand 6 feet away from each other, or we'll just make up other stuff and you have to believe it. And if you don't believe it, you're going to lose your job. So that is the issue with these people. They pontificate on matters they don't know anything about, and it leads to authoritarian decisions in our life. And so I digress, but, I can't help doing that. I just do it, And so, nonetheless, the universe is made by God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The stars aren't like somebody's, pudding of a giant or something. They're not the gods. They're not anything. God made the heavens and the earth. Light, matter, sound, energy, you name it, he made it. We've gone through 2 points. I have a third point. So the first point is what? The universe has an absolute beginning that is uncontested. The second point is that the universe is made by God. The third point is that the universe is fine-tuned to exist and even for life. Now, fine-tuning. We have no guitars up here, but there's a piano over there. And I'm not particularly a musical person, but if somebody plays a badly out of tune piano, even I can hear it. We all can hear it. So somebody comes up and they adjust the strings or a violin and they tune that instrument and they get so that it's perfectly tuned. Can anything be perfectly tuned? Well, relatively so. Right? So when I speak about that, I'm speaking about that I accept that there was a Big Bang, but I want to be clear that it was however it happened, God did it. And don't forget that everything, all the energy, and then later time, matter, gravity, laws of the universe, all were created by him and happened instantaneously when he just spoke the word. Logos, Jesus, boom. It all happened right there. And when that all happened, it was absolutely an unbelievable explosion. I want you to think about, if you would, for a minute, imagine a massive explosion. And how often does a massive explosion create a ridiculous amount of order? A ridiculous amount of organization and complexity. Explosions usually are just a bigger mess. You follow me? But here we have that the universe is unbelievably fine-tuned. This is so out of our realm that it may be hard for me to explain this and to grasp this. But there are multiple forces. I'm just going to speak about 2 of them. One is gravity, and the other is nuclear forces. We understand that gravity, because here it is, right? You drop something, it goes down. We understand the force of gravity. Why does this go down? Because this object here has a weight and a mass, and the entire earth has a weight and a mass, and the earth exerts a force on this that allows this to go down. If you're on the moon, because the mass of the moon is smaller, it's smaller. When you drop it, it's going to go slower. If I can jump so high here, I can jump twice, 3, 4 times as high on the moon because the force of gravity is smaller. It's not that really the laws of gravity are consistent. It just has to do with the size of the mass of things affect what gravity is. But we can all understand that the force of gravity is relatively weak, correct? And we can also understand that there is force in a nucleus, inside an atom, that there is a force there in every single cell, and that's incredibly strong. And that if you split an atom, you get a massive amount of energy, right? With atomic bombs and nuclear energy. And so we have gravitational force that is very weak. And then you have nuclear force, which is 10 to the 40th times stronger than gravity force. Let me try to just wrap you around that. That's a 1 with 40 zeros. 40 zeros. That's how much stronger the nuclear force is to gravity. And so, if you adjusted gravity by just 1 part per 10 to the 34th, which means nothing to anyone, so I looked up this analogy. If you take the entire distance of the galaxies, forget the galaxies, the universe. So if you go from one end of the universe to the other end, however far that is, wicked far, right? So you think about that as the strength of gravity, how the gravity force is that distance. And after you're at one length of the galaxy and the other length is over there, and that's the power of gravity, and you move 1 inch. You move 1 inch forward. So now gravity is just that much different. Life doesn't exist. There's no universe. You move 1 inch, it doesn't exist. When we're talking about finely tuned, I understand nobody can grasp 10 to the 34th. But just in that way, you have just this perfect balance. You say, well, what will happen? When you just slightly adjust nuclear forces or gravity forces, when it's gravity forces, you won't get the sun and you won't get planets to form. If they're too weak, everything will stay too organized. If they're just a hair too strong, they'll compact, it'll just blow up. It's just right there. And back to our friend Stephen Hawking, the remarkable fact that the value of these numbers, the constants of physics, seem to have been finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. Seem to be finely adjusted by somebody, but not. It randomly happened that this is within that much of a distance. And it's the same for cells, that if the nuclear force was just a teeny bit stronger, you wouldn't have all the different atoms that there are, oxygen, hydrogen. You would just have hydrogen, which would break into helium. Nothing would happen. And if it was a little weaker, everything would fall apart. There's so many of these that everything is just right on the dime, just perfectly balanced. And the scientism will go and say, that's all by chance. And the mathematician starts to say, whoa, I'm going to do more of this next week. I have an issue with you talking about things by chance when we're starting to get to this is 10 to the 40, this is 10 to the 30. Then for both of them to happen is like 10 to the 120. It just becomes, it's literally like taking all the atoms in the entire universe and looking for one. The first one you pick, you find it. You found it on the first one. And so what they've begun to do is say that we live in one universe and there's a multiverse, that there's an infinite number of universes. What's the evidence for that again? Zero. It's pretty cool to watch on like the TV shows Flash and Marvel Comics and everything, that there's these multiverses, but it's completely made up, okay? And so I could go on. Last week I spoke about the speed of light, the intensity of light. If light was just a little faster, everything would burn up. If it was a little slower, things would be too dull. You just have things just right. Then the relationships between the mass of something, E equals MC squared. I'm not going to get into physics. Everyone's going to leave. But I like this stuff. I find it interesting. It doesn't make me believe in God less. I don't have enough faith to not believe in God. I just would need a lot more faith to believe that God doesn't exist, and I don't have it. I'm not a scientism person. Because of that, I'm glad that they believe that. I want to leave. I know this is more biology class vibe than my usual preaching, but look at people are attacking you about these things if you're in the public square. Be ready to have an answer for the faith that you have. I want to say one more thing about it. I was in biology class at Tufts University, 1983, 84, something like that. And I remember very clearly my biology teacher saying, after she talked about the origin of the universe, she said, "You are all just organized stardust. You're nothing more than organized stardust." And you know what she said after that? She caught herself and she said, "But you're all very special." I didn't feel that special after the organized stardust. She had a problem. She wasn't fully yet wrapped around scientism. You see that? She couldn't quite embrace it. There was something in her that was a worship team come up that was causing her to question it. But my whole point of these first 3 points is if you look at things and if the way you have a worldview, how you make sense of your life and everything is God, then you will see good in things and you will see God's purpose in your life. And if you don't, and you believe everything is luck and random and too bad, you won't find that. You won't see it. If it's right in your face, you won't see it. If you have no meaning in the universe, if there's no meaning in the creation of the entire universe, there's certainly no meaning in your life. It has to follow. You have absolute, this is not what Christians believe, this is scientism, what they believe. There is no meaning if everything is just random and luck and nothing. And they just, with a wave of the hand, explain away beauty and God and Jesus Christ and purpose. And just in your day-to-day life, if something happens, you want this to happen and it doesn't happen. Sometimes we're like, that was the devil right there. No, maybe that was God because you're being selfish. And if you look for God in the situation, how many times will you see, "Oh, I see what you're doing later on, God"? Who doesn't know that in their life? Who hasn't felt that and said, "Yeah, you know what? I see what you're doing now, God. Thank you for doing that. I wanted to do this, but you said no. Then I stomped up and down a few times and you still said no." When I finally stopped stomping up and down and I was like, "Show me," it's right there. It's right there. And if you don't believe in God and you think everything is nothing and meaningless, then why not just get hammered every day and smoke weed every day and treat people like dirt and get ahead and steal, lie, and cheat? Why not? Why not? If you want to fill the void in your life with scientism, you will just fill it and fill it and fill it, and you'll look in there and go, the void's exactly the same. You can't fill a void with nothing and make it not a void. When you fill the void in your life with Jesus, with God created the heaven and the earth, that God, the universe is made by God. Let me just end with this. I wasn't even going to do this. God just gave me this. I got last point. Wasn't even on my points, but this is my last point. Substitute your name or your life with universe for my 3 points. You have an absolute beginning. Undisputed. Even scientism will say, yeah, you have a beginning. Yeah. It's actually interesting when you talk to scientisms about the beginning. Okay? When you speak to somebody with scientism about the beginning, they're like, you say, look, all human life is valuable, even, in the, earliest states of an embryo. And then they say, no, that's actually your religion that tells you that all, that life begins at conception. That's your religious belief that it begins at conception. And it's like, what you say to the scientism person is, no, actually, that's science that teaches us that life begins at conception. That's what science teaches. What my religion, not that we call it that, what our faith teaches us is that life has value, that it has value. But the point of this is that the universe has an absolute beginning. You have an absolute beginning. That beginning is undisputed. So from there, the second point is where the divergence is. Instead of the universe is made by God, you are made by God. You have been made by God. You have been created by God. We'll get